a wealthy man, with power and arrogance, did not hesitate to humiliate a young cashier, treating her as if she were worthless. But what he didn't know was that the person standing behind the counter was none other than Elon Musk, the billionaire, founder of Tesla and SpaceX, who was conducting a secret experiment to better understand the lives of ordinary workers. Could he truly feel the pain and injustice that they face every day? Follow this story, where each step of Elon's journey is not just an experiment, but a profound transformation that he never expected. That day, at the checkout lane of a large supermarket, Elon Musk stood quietly behind the counter, wearing only a simple shirt and a name tag that read Eli on his chest. No one recognized him, not as the billionaire, not as the tech genius everyone knew. He scanned items calmly, as if he were just one of the many nameless cashiers. In that moment, Elon was no longer the creator of revolutions. He was simply a man doing a job that few would pay attention to. He didn't want to draw attention, and no one did. Every gaze around him overlooked an ordinary face like his. That's exactly what he needed, a covert experiment to see how people treated those working mundane jobs every day. The world of those behind the cashier counter, of those doing work that hardly anyone notices, while billions of dollars swirl around a world in which he is a part. His hand automatically slid each item across the scanner, the regular beep echoing, like a reminder of the simple tasks he had never had to do before. A sudden thought flashed through his mind. Have I ever stopped and looked into the eyes of people doing this job? He couldn't remember, and perhaps he had never thought about it. Just as he was lost in these thoughts, a man entered the checkout lane, his presence like a jolt. Tall, with an overwhelming air of arrogance. He wore an expensive suit, and each step he took radiated unmasked pride. His actions were rude, throwing the items onto the counter as if he were tossing something unimportant. Each item hit the counter with a dry thud, breaking the silence of the space. He didn't look at Elon, didn't acknowledge his presence, but instead, he was completely absorbed in his phone screen. It seemed as though everything outside the phone didn't exist. A heavy feeling began to fill the air. Elon quietly scanned his items: milk, eggs, bread. All these were so familiar. But in this moment, they felt different, like part of a life he had never paid attention to. Elon could feel the clear divide between him and this man. Every detail of the man, from his luxurious suit to his shiny watch to his impatient foot tapping, exuded a difference. A difference not just in material wealth but in the way he treated the world around him. Everything about this man reflected a world that Elon had never had to live in. When the man waved his credit card across the counter, without a word or a glance at the cashier, Elon simply smiled inwardly. A strange feeling welled up inside him, as if he were standing in the middle of an experiment of life, seeing more clearly the discrimination and the way people could perceive one another. "Your total is $68, Elon said in a calm voice, breaking the prolonged silence. The man didn't respond, merely waved his hand as the credit card dropped onto the counter like an indifferent gesture. Elon could feel the coldness in the way he acted, as if he were transacting with an invisible person, not a human being. A fleeting glance was all Elon received, but it was enough for him to realize that no matter what, people like him would never understand the job he was doing. Elon quietly swiped the card, his hand moving rhythmically, like a reflex. In that moment, he felt the stark difference between those with power and those without. He had once been someone with power, someone who had everything in his hands. But now he was standing in a role he had never had to face before, a cashier, an anonymous person in the eyes of others. Suddenly, a sharp beep sounded from the scanner. The screen displayed the message, "Unable to process card." Elon looked at it, his eyes momentarily showing a sense of surprise. The man in front of him turned around, his tone cold, breaking the atmosphere. "Is my card broken?" he asked, his voice irritated. as if something unbearable had just happened. Elon calmly replied, "It's possible the card didn't scan. That happens sometimes. Would you like to try another card?" The man gripped his card tightly, his hands starting to tremble uncontrollably. He pulled out the card and shoved it forcefully into the slot. His action showed frustration, a simmering anger rising within him. Once again, the beep echoed. Unable to process. "Can't it scan again?" The man grunted, his face reddening. His eyes flashed as if something was about to explode. "What's wrong with your machine?" Elon didn't back down. "It's not the machine. It might be an issue with your card. Would you like to try another one?" Faced with Elon's cold suggestion, the man was mildly shocked. He was used to having everything go according to his will. But here, in this moment, everything wasn't happening the way he wanted. His lips pressed together. His eyes grew colder. He yanked his wallet from his pocket and pulled out another card. This one shiny and new, like a weapon in his hands. He didn't speak, just thrust the card toward Elon with an impatient expression. Elon took the card and quickly swiped it through the machine again. A second of silence, long as eternity, passed while the scanner processed. The beep sounded. Accepted. The man sighed in relief. But right after that, a smirk appeared on his face. He grabbed the shopping bag tightly, squeezing it so hard that an egg carton inside it fell and shattered on the tile floor. The yolk splattered out, spreading into a small puddle. But the man only looked at it without changing his expression. Instead of stopping, he shoved a can of soda toward Elon, his gaze like fire, filled with contempt and no remorse. Elon stood motionless, his hands slightly clenched on the cashier counter, his heart tormented. He had prepared himself to face the harsh reality of this world. But this was beyond anything he had imagined. The disrespect in the man's gaze, the arrogance in his attitude, everything that unfolded made it impossible for Elon to accept. A thought flashed through Elon's mind. He could step out, introduce himself, let the man know that the cashier before him was none other than one of the wealthiest people on the planet. But no, Elon did not do that. He simply stood silently, watching the man's steps as he walked away, leaving behind a mess of broken goods and spilled soda on the floor. The others in the store looked on, their eyes helpless. They didn't dare act, unsure of what to do when everything became so awkward. Elon remained standing, not out of anger, but because of a deep disappointment within him. Yes, he had come here for another reason, and now he understood how much of a grave mistake he had made. As he bent down to pick up the scattered items on the floor, an unexpected event occurred. The man, in his self-satisfaction, failed to notice and collided with a middle-aged woman passing by. The impact made her drop her handbag, and her belongings spilled across the floor. The man didn't even bother to turn back, only casting a glance and muttering an impolite remark. "Watch where you're standing. This isn't the place to be." The woman bent down, hurriedly picking up the scattered items, her eyes weary and resigned. Elon looked at her, and in that moment, a bitter feeling rose in his chest. She was a representative of those who face indifference and contempt from those who consider themselves superior every day. When the automatic door closed behind the man, the store returned to silence. But this time, the silence didn't bring a sense of peace. The air became suffocating, like a dark cloud covering the space. Elon realized that, although he had been accustomed to discrimination and separation in meetings, this time, it had touched a dark corner of his soul that he had never explored. He stood there in his simple uniform, feeling an unprecedented pain, not because of the man's words, but because of the realities he had just faced. Is this how it is? Is this what workers have to live with every day? The mockery, the disdainful looks, the injustice just because someone believes they have more power than everyone else? The pain became a heavy burden on Elon's shoulders, as if everything he had been through had no meaning. Throughout the years, he had lived in a world where everyone respected him, smiled at him, served him. But now he realized those smiles meant nothing. He thought about the salespeople, the cashiers, the workers toiling in the shadows of society that he had never truly paid attention to. All those people, they had lived their lives in silence, serving people like him, but no one had ever truly acknowledged them properly. Elon bent down, his gaze stopping on the broken egg shells. His hand moved gently, pulling each shard of broken shell off the floor. The cold, slimy feeling spreading as the yolk stuck to his hand. This was a task that few paid attention to, a small mishap in the hustle of life. But for him, it became a very personal moment. He could have called for a cleaner, but why not do it himself? If not for something deeper? He stood up straight, his eyes still fixed on the scene before him, the young cashiers working diligently. The young woman near the counter, her skin pale from fatigue, her eyes lifeless, still managed a faint smile when she accidentally looked his way. That smile was incomplete, not strong enough to hide the exhaustion, yet contained something he had never noticed before, a silent empathy, an unspoken sharing of the struggles she had to bear. Elon couldn't ignore the strange feeling in his chest, the emotion that made him pause and think. What he had done, the changes he had once believed were necessary, had they truly helped anyone? Or were they just strategies, soulless technologies, offering no real change to the lives of those who struggled every day, unseen by anyone? The space around him seemed to grow quieter. Elon sighed, not from disappointment, but from a newfound awareness. He saw the weariness in the young woman's eyes, the unspoken effort of those around her, and a painful truth struck him: everything he had once thought was important couldn't help them. A wealthy man like him, standing in a cashier's uniform, felt out of place when confronted with a reality he had never fully seen. The confidence and power he had always carried now seemed meaningless. Everything became small and insignificant when standing among these people. He released the broken egg shells from his hands, saying nothing. The young woman looked at him again, a hint of surprise in her eyes, then turned away to continue her work. Elon stood there for a moment, not wanting to disturb anyone further. But in that instant, he understood that respect didn't come from titles or wealth. It came from recognizing and understanding the hardships others faced every day. The days slowly passed in the hurried steps of customers, all busy with their own worlds. But one person still stood there, silently observing. Elon was not the only one doing this job, but the feeling he had was completely different. He watched everything around him, noticing the empty stares, the tired gestures of the workers. They seemed like shadows passing through a space no one really paid attention to. The forced smiles, the half-hearted greetings, a world that existed without anyone noticing. As he continued his work, Elon not only scanned barcodes and handed items to customers, but in his mind, a new stream of thought was forming. He felt the pain of the workers, those who were overlooked, ignored. A simple greeting from a customer was a luxury for them. This not only made him feel uneasy, but it also urged him to think about how to change the entire system that he had once been a part of. Everything he did, every project he invested in, was just a small part of a bigger picture, a picture of how society treated those who had no voice. At the end of the workday, a heavy feeling enveloped Elon. It wasn't physical exhaustion, but an awakening to something deeper. He understood that life didn't just need innovation in work, it also required a change in how we perceive and treat the people who are often forgotten. And Elon knew that he could do something to change that. Driving home, Elon's mind spun. He had lived a whole life surrounded by lavish parties, under the glittering lights of wealth and power. But now, with the empty streets and darkness surrounding his car, he felt like a different person. He knew he could never go back to the way he was. These thoughts kept swirling in his mind, constantly urging him to do something truly meaningful. He could change. Not just about himself, but also about the values that society was overlooking. The car stopped in the driveway, the lights shining on the walls of the mansion, which he had once viewed as his home. But today, this place felt unfamiliar, as if he was facing a different reality that he had never recognized before. Deep within his soul, he felt a strange distance. The man he had once been, a wealthy, successful man, now seemed to have vanished, leaving only a shadow that he couldn't recognize. He stepped out of the car, stood for a moment, and looked up at the night sky. The stars sparkled, like the people who were forgotten, with no one knowing of their existence. As he entered the house, everything was eerily silent. Elon walked through each room, which used to be filled with laughter, lavish parties. But now, the space felt empty. No trace of life. No joy. He walked through the large dining room, where grand dinners once took place. But now it was just a quiet, cold space. Everything that had once been a symbol of power, of wealth, now felt like a torn garment, with nothing left to conceal. Confronted with everything he had once considered important, Elon realized that he had been living in a blind world. The meetings, the lavish meals, the power-filled banquets, all of them were far removed from the reality of the workers he had met that day. And now, having realized the truth, he knew that he could never go back to the way things were. The people who had silently worked in the shadows, unseen, unappreciated, now, they had become an important part of his thoughts. He felt a responsibility to do something, to change the way people viewed them, so they no longer had to live in the shadows. With heavy steps, Elon entered the living room of the mansion. Everything around him remained the same, but in his eyes, everything had changed. A new belief was rising within him. He would do something, find a way to create a real change, not just for himself, but for all those who had been forgotten in this society. Elon walked into his office, where the light from the desk lamps reflected off the books, newspapers, and models of the universe surrounding him. These objects had once been sources of inspiration, symbols of dreams without limits. However, today, his mind was no longer focused on bold inventions or grand plans for the future. Instead, a simple but profound question occupied all his thoughts. What good is technology to a world if the working people don't feel respected? Never before had the clarity on this issue been so strong. He had spent his whole life creating breakthroughs in electric cars and space exploration. But he had only now realized a painful truth: there can be no true progress if a large part of humanity is forgotten, treated like ghosts in this society. He sat down in his chair, exhausted not from the work, but from the deep realization that was gradually emerging within him. His hand rested on the table, feeling its cold surface. The sense of being looked down upon in the cashier's uniform that day still lingered in his mind. The gazes of the customers who didn't even glance at him. The cold words of the wealthy man. But instead of breaking him, these memories ignited a flame in him, a flame of determination. He realized that change doesn't come from electric cars or rockets, but from how we treat each other. How can we talk about progress when workers still live in the shadows, left behind, invisible in the eyes of society? We can't just care about technology and forget about people, Elon thought. True change will not come from the giant numbers on the balance sheet, but from the small acts of kindness and fairness, from ensuring that every worker feels valued, from creating a world where no one has to endure the cruelty of injustice. He began to write down his new thoughts. Not the next strategy for Tesla or a new project for SpaceX, but a more ambitious plan. How could he create an environment where it's not just the wealthy who can rise, but everyone, regardless of who they are, can be respected and acknowledged? Ideas about workers' welfare, fair wages, mental health support for hardworking laborers. Each idea was like a small spark in the dark. But they all carried a great mission. What if every company in this world put people before profits? What would the world be like? A world where no one struggles to survive. Where everyone is seen as a person of value. Could it be possible? A revolution in how we see each other. In how we treat each other? Elon leaned back. His eyes no longer on the computer screen, but focused on his own thoughts. The great plans he now saw more clearly than ever. A global movement could start here. From the small actions of every company, every organization. And if everyone worked toward a common goal of respect and fairness, could we create a world without discrimination and abandon it? He thought back to the man who had mocked him. Would he ever see the world through the eyes of the workers? Could he ever feel the helplessness of standing behind, instead of being served? But the more important thing was that Elon had changed. And from that change, he could inspire others to change as well. He stood up, feeling like he had just found a new path. Tomorrow, the world would again see Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, SpaceX. But today, he was a man with a new mission. Not to improve technology, but to improve the way people treat each other. As he walked into the bedroom, Elon's thoughts kept spinning. A voice echoed in his mind. If I can change, the world can change too. He felt a new strength rising within him. A source of energy not from technology or money, but from the determination to change the very foundations of society. Tomorrow would not be like the days before. And that was a hopeful beginning. Elon couldn't stop thinking about what he had written. The pages on his desk were filled with ideas not only about technology, but about people. About fairness. And compassion. He had once thought that progress could only come from grand achievements. World-changing inventions. But today, he realized that true change comes from simple, yet more important things, the way we treat each other every day. He looked out the window, where the first light of dawn began to peek through the clouds. The world outside kept turning, but within him, everything seemed to stand still. The empty feeling after the long nights of thinking was gone. Instead, there was a strong sense of hope. A new mission was forming within him, not to build rockets to take humans to Mars, not to revolutionize industries with technology, but to lead a revolution of dignity, of how we treat those around us. Elon knew he couldn't change the world alone. But if he could change the way some people think about the value of labor and humanity, that would be an important step. Every person, whether rich or poor, whether they stand anywhere in society, deserves respect and the opportunity to express themselves. And then, he remembered a moment in his life, when he stood among a crowd at a large conference, listening to lies and empty promises from leaders, wondering if they would ever truly understand what the workers out there were facing. He had once believed that those in power could change everything. But now he understood that it was the nameless ones, the ones without a voice, who were the real agents of true change. It was these people, the ones who worked tirelessly without rest, the silent laborers, who were the true force of this world. They were the ones who built everything we have. And if they are not treated fairly, if they are not respected, then all technological progress is just an illusion. One day, while visiting a Tesla electric car manufacturing plant, he met a worker named David, who had been there since the early days. David was not a standout person, not a leader of any department, but he always worked with all he had. Elon remembered the brief conversation he had with David when he asked him about his job and the struggles in life. David's answer made him think deeply. We work not because we want money or fame. You know, we work because we want to see our company grow. But sometimes, the feeling of not being truly recognized is really sad. David's words echoed in Elon's mind for a long time. He realized that throughout his life, he had been too focused on the big things. The names, the ambitious strategies, forgetting the people behind it all. It was they who were creating true change. From that moment on, Elon decided that he would never forget the workers again. He began changing the way his company treated its employees. Reforms in welfare, compensation packages, and mental health support programs were implemented. But he didn't want to stop there. He wanted to spread this message globally. He planned a new project called The Power of Humanity. This would be a global campaign to raise awareness about the value of workers, to encourage other companies to follow suit. Elon knew that, although he couldn't change everything immediately, if he could spark interest and change in a large portion of the population, it would be the beginning of a global revolution for human rights and fairness. The next day, as the sunlight shone through the window of his office, Elon felt an unusual sense of peace. Although the grand goals were still there, within him, a new mission had been born. A mission not only to make the world a better place through technology but also to change the way people treat one another, bringing fairness, respect, and compassion. He lifted his head and looked toward the future with a determined gaze. If I can change, the world can change, he told himself. And with that belief, Elon Musk began a journey not just to create electric cars or rockets, but to change the way the world views and treats workers. A world where everyone, regardless of status or wealth, can feel respect and love. That was the future Elon wanted to build. And as that day came to a close, he knew that, even though the world had not changed immediately, he had taken a big step toward creating a world where no one would be left behind. Note, this is a fictional story, created for entertainment and conveying meaningful messages. All characters, events, and details in the story are products of imagination and do not reflect any real events or individuals. We are not responsible for any misunderstandings regarding the content of the story.